Dean Martin was in a 1977 hospital bed when doctors said it's over after his massive heart attack. 6 months later, he walked onto the Vegas stage and delivered the performance of his lifetime, proving that the King of Cool couldn't be counted out. It was March 15, 1977, and Dean Martin was lying unconscious in the cardiac intensive care unit at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. At 59, the man who had been the picture of effortless cool for 3 decades was fighting for his life, connected to machines that were doing most of the work his damaged heart could no longer handle. The heart attack had struck without warning 3 days earlier, while Dean was rehearsing at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. He had been running through Everybody Loves Somebody with the orchestra when he suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed on stage. The paramedics who rushed him to the hospital said it was one of the most severe cardiac events they had ever seen in a patient who was still alive. Dr. Robert Friedman, the cardiologist overseeing Dean's care, had delivered devastating news to Dean's family that morning. The damage to Dean's heart was so extensive that even if he survived, he would never be able to perform again. In fact, Dr. Friedman wasn't sure Dean would even be able to live a normal life. "I'm sorry," Dr. Friedman had told Dean's children, "but you need to prepare yourselves. The next 48 hours will determine whether your father survives at all, and if he does survive, he'll be an invalid for whatever time he has left." Dean's daughter, Deanna, was devastated. Her father had always been larger than life, a man who seemed immune to the physical limitations that affected other people. The idea that he might never sing again, never perform again, never even walk without assistance seemed impossible to accept, but the medical evidence was undeniable. Dean's heart attack had been what doctors called a widowmaker, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery that supplies blood to the heart's main pumping chamber. Most people who suffer this type of heart attack don't survive the ambulance ride to the hospital. For the first 2 weeks, Dean drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware of the teams of specialists working around the clock to keep him alive. His heart rhythm was dangerously unstable. His blood pressure required constant medication to maintain, and his kidneys were showing signs of failure from the stress his body had endured. Frank Sinatra visited every day, sitting beside Dean's bed and talking to him, even though the doctors weren't sure Dean could hear anything. Sammy Davis Jr. flew in from New York and refused to leave the hospital until he knew his friend would survive. This can't be how it ends for Dino. He's supposed to outlive all of us because he never takes anything too seriously. But as the days passed, Dean's condition seemed to stabilize at a level that offered survival but little hope for recovery. He was conscious more often, but weak and confused. The medications were keeping him alive, but they were also clouding his mind and sapping what little strength he had. "Dean, you're lucky to be alive," the doctor said gently, "but I need to be honest with you about what the future looks like. Your heart has been severely damaged. You're going to need constant medical supervision, a strict diet, and probably round-the-clock nursing care." Dr. Friedman paused, struggling with how to deliver the next piece of news. "And I'm afraid your performing days are over. Any kind of physical exertion or emotional stress could trigger another heart attack that would almost certainly be fatal." Dean listened to this news with the same impassive expression he'd worn on stage for 30 years, but inside, something was breaking that had nothing to do with his damaged heart. 3 weeks after the heart attack, Dr. Friedman sat down with Dean for the first time to explain his prognosis.
"So what you're telling me," Dean said slowly, "is that I'm supposed to spend whatever time I have left sitting in a chair watching the world go by?" "I'm telling you that you need to find a new way to live," Dr. Friedman replied. "Many heart attack survivors go on to have fulfilling lives, just different lives than they had before." Dean nodded politely, but privately he was thinking that a life without performing, without the connection he felt with audiences, without the music that had defined him for decades, wasn't really a life worth living. For the next month, Dean went through the motions of recovery. He attended physical therapy sessions where he learned to walk short distances without becoming breathless. He met with nutritionists who explained the bland, low-sodium diet he would need to follow for the rest of his life. He practiced taking the handful of medications he would need to swallow every day to keep his damaged heart functioning. But anyone who knew Dean could see that he was just going through the motions. The spark that had made him the king of cool seemed to have been extinguished along with his damaged heart muscle. His children were particularly worried because Dean had always been a fighter, someone who faced adversity with humor and determination. But this time, he seemed to have given up completely. "It's like he's already dead," Deanna told her brother Dean Paul. "He's breathing and talking, but the person we knew is gone." What Dean's family didn't know was that he had been having conversations with someone who understood exactly what he was going through, Tony Bennett. Bennett had suffered his own heart attack 5 years earlier and had been told by doctors that his performing career was over. Instead of accepting that prognosis, Tony had worked with a specialized cardiac rehabilitation program to gradually rebuild his strength and stamina until he was able to return to the stage. "Dean," Tony told him during one of their phone conversations, "the doctors don't understand what performing means to people like us. They see it as physical stress, but for us, it's spiritual nourishment. Without it, we die anyway, just more slowly." Tony had connected Dean with Dr. Marcus Webb, a cardiologist in New York who specialized in working with professional athletes and performers who needed to push the boundaries of what traditional cardiac care considered safe. Dr. Webb's philosophy was radically different from the conservative approach Dean had been receiving. Instead of telling heart attack survivors what they couldn't do, Dr. Webb focused on gradually expanding what they could do, using careful monitoring and progressive training to rebuild cardiac capacity. "Mr. Martin," Dr. Webb told Dean during their first consultation, "I can't promise you that you'll be able to perform again, but I can promise you that we're going to find out exactly what your heart can handle, and we're going to push those limits as far as safely possible." For the first time since his heart attack, Dean smiled a real smile. The rehabilitation program Dr. Webb designed for Dean was unlike anything the traditional cardiologists had recommended. Instead of gentle walks and limited activity, Dean began a carefully monitored program of progressive exercise that gradually increased his heart's capacity to handle stress. But the most important part of Dean's recovery wasn't physical, it was psychological. Dr. Webb understood that for someone like Dean Martin, the will to live was directly connected to the ability to perform. "We're not just rebuilding your heart muscle," Dr. Webb explained. "We're rebuilding your identity as a performer. That's what's going to give you the motivation to do the hard work of recovery." Dean's rehabilitation included sessions where he would sing while connected to heart monitors, allowing the medical team to see exactly how his cardiovascular system responded to the emotional and physical demands of performance.
Amazingly, the data showed that when Dean was singing, his heart actually functioned more efficiently than during other forms of exercise. It was as if his body had been designed for this specific type of activity. "It's remarkable," Dr. Webb told Dean after reviewing weeks of test results. "Most patients show stress responses when they attempt to return to their previous activities, but your heart seems to remember what it was built to do." By August 1977, 5 months after doctors had written Dean off as an invalid, he was singing full songs during his rehabilitation sessions without any dangerous changes in his heart rhythm or blood pressure. Dr. Webb made a decision that would have horrified traditional cardiologists. He cleared Dean to attempt a live performance with the understanding that it would be carefully monitored and stopped immediately if there were any signs of cardiac distress. Dean's first choice for his comeback performance was the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, the same stage where he had collapsed 6 months earlier. He wanted to prove, both to himself and to the world, that his heart attack had been a setback, not an ending. The news that Dean Martin was planning a comeback performance spread quickly through Las Vegas and the entertainment industry. Many people were skeptical, wondering if Dean was taking an unnecessary risk or if his doctors were being irresponsible. But Frank Sinatra, who had been there for every step of Dean's recovery, understood exactly what this performance meant. "Dino needs this more than his heart needs rest," Frank told reporters. "Performing isn't what's dangerous for him. Not performing is what's dangerous." On September 15, 1977, exactly 6 months after doctors had said, "It's over," Dean Martin walked onto the stage at the Sands Hotel to a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. The audience knew they were witnessing something special, something that the medical experts had said was impossible. Here was a man who had been given last rites 6 months earlier, standing on stage and looking like the same cool, confident entertainer they had always loved. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Dean himself.
Instead of playing it safe with a short, careful performance, Dean found himself energized by the audience's response in a way he hadn't expected. The connection he felt with the crowd, the joy of being back where he belonged, seemed to give him strength rather than drain it. He performed for nearly 2 hours, singing all of his biggest hits and telling stories with the same effortless charm that had made him famous. But there was something different about this performance, something deeper and more meaningful than his previous shows. "You know," Dean told the audience near the end of the evening, "6 months ago the doctors told me I might never sing again. Tonight you've reminded me why I had to prove them wrong. Music isn't just what I do for a living, it's how I stay alive." The performance was more than just a successful comeback. It was a demonstration that the human spirit, when properly motivated and supported, can overcome medical prognoses that seem absolutely final. Dr. Webb, who had monitored Dean's vital signs throughout the performance via remote telemetry, was amazed by the data. Not only had Dean's heart handled the stress of performing, but his cardiac function had actually improved during the show. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Webb later told medical colleagues. "It's as if Dean Martin's heart was designed specifically for performing. The emotional and physical demands of being on stage actually made his cardiovascular system work better, not worse." Dean's successful comeback changed the way cardiologists thought about recovery and rehabilitation. His case became a landmark study in the medical literature, demonstrating that for some patients, returning to meaningful activities, even physically demanding ones, could be more beneficial than traditional rest-based recovery. But perhaps the most important impact of Dean's recovery was on other heart attack survivors who had been told their active lives were over. Dean received thousands of letters from people who said his comeback had given them the courage to push beyond their doctor's conservative recommendations and reclaim their own lives. One letter from a 45-year-old construction worker in Ohio said, "Mr. Martin, if you can get back on stage 6 months after a heart attack, then I can get back to work. You showed me that doctors don't always know what's possible." Dean continued performing for several more years, always under careful medical supervision, but with a joy and energy that seemed to contradict his cardiac diagnosis. He had proven that sometimes the best medicine for a damaged heart is to give it something worth beating for. The man who was supposed to be an invalid 6 months after his heart attack had instead become living proof that the human spirit, when properly motivated and supported, can overcome even the most dire medical prognoses. Dean Martin's recovery became legendary, not just because he defied his doctor's prognosis, but because he showed that sometimes what looks like the end is really just the beginning of a different kind of story.
one where courage and determination matter more than medical statistics. When doctors said it's over for Dean Martin in 1977, they were thinking about his damaged heart muscle, but they weren't thinking about his undamaged will to live, to perform, and to prove that the King of Cool couldn't be counted out as easily as they thought.
Amazingly, the data showed that when Dean was singing, his heart actually functioned more efficiently than during other forms of exercise. It was as if his body had been designed for this specific type of activity. "It's remarkable," Dr. Webb told Dean after reviewing weeks of test results. "Most patients show stress responses when they attempt to return to their previous activities, but your heart seems to remember what it was built to do." By August 1977, 5 months after doctors had written Dean off as an invalid, he was singing full songs during his rehabilitation sessions without any dangerous changes in his heart rhythm or blood pressure. Dr. Webb made a decision that would have horrified traditional cardiologists. He cleared Dean to attempt a live performance with the understanding that it would be carefully monitored and stopped immediately if there were any signs of cardiac distress. Dean's first choice for his comeback performance was the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, the same stage where he had collapsed 6 months earlier. He wanted to prove, both to himself and to the world, that his heart attack had been a setback, not an ending. The news that Dean Martin was planning a comeback performance spread quickly through Las Vegas and the entertainment industry. Many people were skeptical, wondering if Dean was taking an unnecessary risk or if his doctors were being irresponsible. But Frank Sinatra, who had been there for every step of Dean's recovery, understood exactly what this performance meant. "Dino needs this more than his heart needs rest," Frank told reporters. "Performing isn't what's dangerous for him. Not performing is what's dangerous." On September 15, 1977, exactly 6 months after doctors had said it's over, Dean Martin walked onto the stage at the Sands Hotel to a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. The audience knew they were witnessing something special, something that the medical experts had said was impossible. Here was a man who had been given last rites 6 months earlier, standing on stage and looking like the same cool, confident entertainer they had always loved. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Dean himself.